and broadcasting. At the time, this present time, I'm not seeing anybody in the audience, which is a little bit odd. Heather said she might be.
For attendees.
Yep. There we go. We got a few folks arriving to our meeting. Okay, Councilor Shand, are you there?
I am.
Good evening.
Councilor Wallace is somewhere too.
Yes, Councilor Wallace, are you with us?
I am here.
Good evening. Okay, with us this evening, we have Jordy Vining, who's the city's senior project manager, Glenn Hartman and Richard Pacella from contractors, Councilor Shand and Councilor Wallace. Councilor Shand or Wallace, did you want to give any introductory comments, or Jordy?
I'll let Jordy give us the overview.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I think my working assumption is going to be that people are generally familiar with the purpose and the background of the Safe Routes to Schools project, which is focused on this 1,800 or 2,000 foot section of High Street, which can be seen on the shared screen there, and is focused primarily on sidewalk and crosswalk improvements to improve the ability of students as well as the general public, all of us, but particularly students, to get to and from school using bicycles and their own 2 feet, as opposed to motor vehicles. And I think what we might do is I will pass the baton over to Glenn and Richard, who represent the state contractor working on this project. We don't have with us the Mass DOT resident engineer, Laura Beth Solomon, who's running the project, but Glenn and Richard can perhaps give us a quick report on the status of the project and what they're working on right now and what they're looking towards in the next couple of weeks. And then we can open, with Andy as the moderator, we can open it up to questions and have a little Q&A session as best we can.
Great.
Good evening. This is Richard Pacella, president of RM Pacella, contractor doing the work out there for the Safe Routes project. As I'm sure many of you have passed through in the past couple of months, have recognized that there's been a heavy concentration of some utility work, new drainage, some water relocation of existing hydrants, and as present, some excavation for the new curb line and sidewalk. Going forward over the next couple weeks, I think that you'll notice that new curb lines will start going in, as well as the preparation and installation of new sidewalks. The intention for, let's say, the next 3 to 4 weeks is to continue and carrying forward with the sidewalks, primarily in the vicinity of the high school area, to get as much, if not all, of the new sidewalk and curb line in and around the high school area, to finish up that work in preparation of school going back into session in September.
Okay, sounds good. I think with that, our main purpose here is to try to answer questions. So Andy, if I could ask you to play your moderating role and work with our attendees to see if any of them would like to, pose any questions that we could try to answer.
Yep, sure thing. For folks out there in the public, I see we have a few attendees. This is a slide I'm putting up just to explain how the public comment process works. We have this unusual process right now because of the COVID situation, having our meetings remotely. So the way that folks can let us know that you're interested in speaking or a question of any kind is just to go to, typically it's at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse down there, there's a raise hand button. And if you click on that, it'll highlight that for us and let us know that you'd like to speak. So if you have any questions for city officials or counselors, Office of Planning Development staff, or the contractors, just raise your hand. We'll give a moment or two for folks to identify themselves if they're interested.
So my hand's raised, Andy.
Oh, sorry, Counselor, please go ahead. I was looking at the attendees list. Please go ahead.
No problem. So thank you, Mr. Hartman and Mr. Pacella for doing this. So I am the Ward 3 City Councilor, which is basically where this entire project is, including the area where you're using Cushing Park as the laydown area. And I've had more than a few residents bring up the concerns about the ongoing work that's where your work is being done starting at 7 o'clock in the morning. I appreciate that's where the only place that was identified in the city that the laydown area could be, but are there any things that could be done to help alleviate some of the noise, dust, anything to make their lives a little bit better for the rest of the summer? Because I know, everyone's home right now. So, I mean, I know that the noise from the trucks starting at 7 o'clock, the backup beeping sound, we are in a residential area. So is there anything that could be done there?
So this concern has not gone unnoticed. I know that it has been brought to our attention. I'm sure spawning from being brought to your attention and Jody's attention.
Right.
So I think we have taken some mitigated efforts to try to alleviate these concerns. And I'll let Glenn touch on it maybe just a little bit more, as he's generally on site more than I am. But just to speak to a couple of them, as far as noise and vehicles, we have make a concerted effort to manage what needs to come in and out of that area, so that we're doing it in quicker, more efficient trips, less trips through the course of the day, to keep the equipment from have to consistently moving in and out of the park area. Dust has also been mitigated with some calcium chloride, and at times utilizing water to keep the dust down. So, it's certainly understood that these are concerns for the surrounding residents, and those we have put in place some mechanisms to try to alleviate some of those concerns, and hopefully it's been better as of late.
Okay. All right, Andy. I think you've got some more folks.
Okay. We have folks in the audience, the Zach and Steph, it looks like. If you'd like to unmute yourselves and speak to the folks that are here. Zach and Steph, you'll have to unmute yourself on your end. There's a unmuting feature on your end you'll have to do as well. We'll give them a moment. Right, we see your hand is raised, but it looks like you're still muted on your own end.
Do you want to go to Counselor Wallace while Zach and Steph unmute themselves?
Please, yeah.
Hello, I'm just going to follow up with Heather's question there, and I think maybe it's a question for Jordy and for Andy. Were there any other sites considered for the laydown area? The school is right there, and school, well, it's summer, so it's not in session, but I just so happened to be on 10th Street today, and I could see the trucks going up and down. It's kind of a long ways. I'm just curious what else was considered, and could you stockpile any of the materials you know, in the street to a certain extent, so they don't have to keep going back and forth. Or maybe that's part of the efficiency. Just any thoughts you may have.
I can jump in there. This is Jordy. Definitely other sites were considered and discussed, and frankly have been continued to be considered and discussed. Heather and I have had these conversations over the course of the past month or so. In terms of the school parking lots, the school facilities manager, Steve Bergholm, has been pretty involved with this project, and he noted that those school parking lots really weren't available or would not be very available for the duration of this project. He's documented for us how Andy has the image on the screen there showing the high school parking lots adjacent to this portion of High Street. And there are other school-related projects going on where they need that parking area. School is coming back into session in or it's at least anticipated to, in a relatively short amount of time, 7 weeks or so. And so there's already use during the summer of the athletic field and the athletic facilities. So there's a lot of other constraints there, which really make it not feasible to have a significant amount of staging and laydown in that area. The DPS Perry Way facility is considerably farther away from the site, and frankly has very little room for additional staging and of materials for a project like this. And there's also concerns about the sort of truck traffic and heavy equipment vehicles going up and down Johnson Street and other streets. So we have looked at other sites. We did look at other sites, and we've continued to review that. But there's been a general consensus that even though we acknowledge that it's no fun for any neighbors to be near a construction zone, that Cushing Park parking lot is the most appropriate temporary storage and laydown site for the project. I would also note, Richard was talking about some of the mitigation efforts taken. I have been emailing and talking directly with several of the residents and neighbors in the area. One of them had, for instance, asked whether there was an alternative pattern for some of the heavy equipment to take to try to minimize the backing up and the associated beeping. And Pachella has done that. For instance, they arranged to have some of their the concrete drainage pipes stacked up in a line outside of the fenced area, so they could come in with the loader, pick them up, turn around, and leave. I saw them doing that this morning, and it's a very quick operation with sort of a minimal amount of beeping and so forth. So I think that especially in the past few weeks, there has been some successful efforts made to mitigate the dust and to sort of minimize the amount of noise there. The equipment is not there 8 hours a day. There's several trips there, and I do believe it's lessened now that most of those concrete structures have been moved out and installed, underground in terms of the new drainage system. So that's some of the context around that subject.
All right, that answers my question. Yeah, as long as it's, always being monitored, and it sounds like you guys are on top of it. I have some other questions, but I'll wait until after if there's anybody else that wants to speak. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, just want to give another opportunity to Zach and Steph, if you are able to unmute yourselves.
Let's
Say hello.
let's try this. Does this work?
We can hear you, yes.
Oh, terrific, great. So we're at the corner of Summit Place and High Street. First of all, thanks for hosting the meeting. And secondly, from our perspective, you guys are doing a good job. It's a difficult thing. It's disruptive, but we all want to get through it. And then from our perspective, you're doing a pretty good job on all this. Two specific questions. Do you anticipate, are you planning for a crosswalk at Summit Place across High Street? And then secondly, what's the anticipated completion date?
Andy, do you want to pull up the those plans?
Yeah, I will pull up that particular segment of the construction plans if you want to speak to that.
Show the crosswalks, yeah. While Andy's doing that, Richard or Glenn, would you like to speak to the progress and the schedule?
So yeah, I'll take that from, I guess, 10,000 feet without getting into the weeds of the day-to-day or week-to-week stuff. The schedule was initially sought and is progressing at a rate that we anticipate having the major components of construction done this construction season. So that would put us into December. We're hopeful and progressing at a way to hopefully be as far as final pavement by the end of the season, but weather will certainly play a factor in that. And I guess at a minimum, we would have the bulk of the construction sidewalk utility work done and be looking to finalize the project with final paving and pavement markings in the spring of next year.
Okay, so construction through the fall, but probably at a lower rate. And then some follow up in the spring is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, from an overall impact, I hope that the surrounding neighborhoods will see going forward maybe a slight less disruption. As Jordy had mentioned, the majority of the drainage work has been installed, which is a lot of the deep excavation, a lot of the larger concrete structures. There is some drainage to remain that should be finishing up over the course of the next month or so, leaving general excavation for sidewalk and then new curb line installation and sidewalk installation. Still requires a good deal of excavation and trucks and machines and disruption for the pedestrians and to walking traffic to utilize one side of the street or the other. But hopefully the overall impact of the surrounding area will lessen from this point forward and continue to lessen as we go on into the fall, into the winter. And then again, yes, correct. And so as of next spring, should really be at the point of just some cleanup. Again, maybe final paving, which is, generally runs itself out in a week or two of a lot of truck traffic and then nothing into line striping and punch lists, which have it down to very to little impact.
Got it. Thank you.
And in terms of crosswalks, Andy's pulled up some of the plan sheets here. I'm not quite sure if you were asking about a crosswalk across Summit Place, but as you can see on the shared screen there is going to be a crosswalk across Summit Place with the bump outs. Yeah, and he's circled it right there. So
yeah.
The bump outs, are intended to lessen the distance that people have to cross, so there's less exposure to motor vehicle traffic, and also keeping cars from being parked too close to that intersection, which interferes with sight lines, and then the associated, handicap accessible ramps and so forth. So that crosswalk is going across Summit Place. And if you don't mind zooming back out, there's not a crosswalk there across High Street. You can see the crosswalk over there at Carter Street on the left, and then there's another one over.
So Kent Street, down by Kent Street, will
Down
be
by-
the only one to the right.
Kent would be the one on the right, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So no new crosswalks on High Street.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yes, thanks.
All right, Andy, I have two questions just to follow up. So one, when the project started, y'all originally had some drainage and sewer line issues. Have you had any problems since the first week of the project? Sounds like y'all are getting close to being done, but I hadn't heard of any other problems of sewer lines needing to be replaced.
No, there was no other, thankfully, there was no other issues like that with sewer lateral lines.
And you've got about a month left of work to be done? Or are you done with sewer lines?
Well, we haven't been replacing sewer lines, but the
Drainage anyway.
yeah, Glenn may speak to this a little bit more, but they're very close to being done with the drainage work. It's just in a couple of other little spots.
Okay. And then my second question is, I know I've noticed sidewalks being closed on the side next to the high school. I'm just wondering, I'm sure this is probably taken care of, but assuming the sidewalk on the other side of the street is open, so it's not a problem for folks to continue traversing down High Street?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, it would be most efficient from the project's perspective, a more narrow perspective, to just take everything out at once and have no sidewalks. But we can't do that, and so we always have to have the detours available to allow passage for people. So in general, as you can see when you go out there, the sidewalk excavation work's been done on the high school side and not on the other. I do know that some people are just continuing to sort of informally walk over there when there isn't work going on. But that is the arrangement.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other folks out there in the public who have questions or comments of any kind? We've heard from, we have a few other attendees. Not sure if there's any questions or if folks just wanted to tune in. We have Mary D'Ambrosio, if you'd like to say hello.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for having this. When you had a prior, as far as discussion regarding what was going to be taking place, my name is Mary D'Ambrosio. We live at 71 Washington Street, and I know my husband, Peter, has been in contact with you all. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to make tonight's meeting, so I'm representing our family and our home. So we live right across from the site, the work site, and the length of time that it seems like this project's going to be going on for, I really implore you to continue just to search for other sites that are not as residential. That's a very active area as far as usually when it's not being used in this way. We have had prior summers that, again, it continues to be used in this as far as a staging area. And this is, honestly, when we moved back to our home, we were out of our home for a short period of time. When we came back home and saw this, we just honestly were very surprised about just the involvement. And we do appreciate and have noticed that things, as far as the noise and whatnot, I know that there's efforts being made, so thank you for that. But now we're on to rocks and just the dumping, and once again, it is a residential, highly trafficked with children, bikes, usage. So I understand the noise factor in the sense of warning people of backing up and the safety of that. But at the same time, due to this, the situation we're living in, people are working from home, including my husband, and we often, it's just so distracting to have all of this commotion that he's often had to leave the house to work elsewhere, whether it be down the street at Cashman, just to have some quiet. So again, I just implore you, it sounds like this is going to be quite involved, a lot longer than I think any of us were prepared for. And I know as projects continue, there are things that come up, and I understand that. But at the same time, I don't know if you're planning on using, across the street as, your launching point in the fall as well. It sounds like that's the direction this is going, and I don't know what other things are going to show up across the street. You know, it started with the fence and then progressed to the vehicles and the equipment, and you know, now we're on to the rocks. So that's and lastly, you know, people have commented that they're just very surprised of the usage of that area. Again, because it's just considered for the neighbors, and during the summer especially, as more of a park area than a staging for like it seems like a DPW work site here. So thank you for your time, and thank you. I hope that I was able to articulate just some of our concerns, and also that you were able to get some answers to some of the questions raised.
Thank you, Mary. I have been emailing back and forth with your husband, Peter, and I thank you for your understanding about this project. I do recognize the frustrations that you're articulating there. I used to live around the corner on Eagle Street. You know, I know the area very well, and had my kids growing up using the park. The park obviously has a somewhat convoluted history with that great big paved area, and basically the determination some years ago that it was going to remain a great big paved area, primarily for winter off-street parking, as opposed to returning it to a grass park the way it was 50 or 70 years ago before the factory turned it into parking. So having it as a big paved spot has led to certain types of uses by the city, by the DPW, DPS. So in terms of, you know, I think we can all work together in terms of future projects. There aren't, as I think I said to your husband, I can't remember now, I'm not aware of any other projects that are on the horizon. I know that part of the concern is there was a previous project a few years ago, I believe, by the local DPS, and now there's this one. I'm not aware of other projects on the horizon, but we should all be taking this into account when new projects come up.
Okay, Mary, does that answer your questions?
Yes, and I just wanted to ask, I know, you know, again, this might be out of your area, but if you have any way of just kind of adding to the fact that for the neighborhood in general, it would be nice, and I think just a good measure to, you know, my understanding is that there's a possibility that things are going to get paved over. And may I just suggest, again, for the neighborhood and for the betterment and for the usage, just saying like again, I know that monetary wise things are tight, but even if they were to offer from Warren Street, up Kent Street over to Washington to Buck Street, if they were able to like compensate the neighborhood that has been directly affected by, you know, upgrading their sidewalks area, as far as all along, like just from Washington to Buck, just that L shape that's continuously being utilized. And I know that my husband has shown some pictures, and it's just honestly like just a way of saying like, thank you for allowing us to use your neighborhood as long as we have. And in addition to paving, you know, the area that we've been in use, you know, we're going to pave the whole area, as well as throw in some sidewalks while we're at it. You know, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I appreciate those ideas. We actually have already been talking about that kind of thing in a general fashion. When this project was framed out by Mass DOT, and this is a federally funded project, and it was framed out by Mass DOT and the engineer TEC. They were fairly strict about limiting, so to speak, the footprint of the project. So there were, you know, on a number of occasions, there was various requests to extend sidewalks down the High Street, from High Street down the various side streets. And that was not incorporated, explicitly not incorporated into the project, which has turned out to be a $2 million approximately project. If there is remaining funds after the whole project is done, because of credits or not having to use all of the contingency for change orders for unexpected conditions, then there's the possibility of talking about whether any additional sidewalk or parking lot repaving can be done. We won't really know that for a few months in terms of how much resources might be available. The amount of area that you're talking about is actually fairly extensive. Buck Street, Washington Street, etc. And this is a perennial problem for Newburyport. There's no doubt that those sidewalks are in very bad condition. Newburyport, not unlike many other communities, but Newburyport has certainly had an issue with having enough resources to address all the miles and miles of sidewalks in town. And sidewalk funding, like I think I was emailing your husband just recently about this, but sidewalk funding comes from local funds, and it comes from, there's a certain state funding called Chapter 90 funding. That's just been level funded the same amount as there has been for years. The legislature was trying to raise that, but the Baker administration has kept it level funded. And so there's never enough resources to go around. The DPS does have a certain amount of resources each year to address sidewalks, and they have some sort of sidewalk prioritization plan. I'm not privy to that. I'm not sure where this area stands along those lines. So that's a somewhat long-winded answer, but we will try to look into those requests as the project progresses this fall.
And lastly, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and lastly, I just wanted to ask, so are we expecting, from what I'm hearing this evening, that this will continue to be the staging area onto the fall, and that it could go longer than that? I just wanted to be clear. And also, there had been discussion, at least from my understanding, that there was going to be repavement of the area in use. And I just want to make sure that that has already been established. And that's all I have to say. So thank you for your time, and thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, just to clarify, that has not been established that that area will be repaved. The pavement in the Cushing Park parking lot and basketball court is in pretty poor condition now, multiple cracks and so forth. The contractor, when given permission to use this site by the Parks Commission, if the noted that if the paving was significantly damaged by the usage, then they would address it. But that didn't necessarily include sort of full repaving of the area. So that's going to be something we'll have to see whether is a possibility given available resources, if there are available resources later in the fall. In terms of your first question about whether the staging area will continue to be a staging area, I believe the answer is yes. Glenn and Richard are in a better position to answer that than I am, with the caveat that the most intensive use was up front with all the drainage structures and the associated gravel fill associated with doing the drainage work, and that once the curbing and castings and so forth are coming out of there, it's going to be less used and less of an issue. Richard or Glenn, do you want to speak to that a little bit in terms of fall use of that area?
Sure. As I stated previously, and as you just did, Jordy, that is accurate. The the heaviest use of the staging area was up front. So I'd like to say we've been through or are going through. From this point forward with curb, sidewalk, there will still be what I would consider a steady use, but hopefully less impact with pipes coming in and out and materials being handled back and forth. Generally, when curbing comes in and is staged, it comes in loads, and then we'll go out over the course of the impact of traffic back and forth. Hopefully, should lessen, and you should see continually lessen into the fall. You know, we're out there trying to do the project as efficient as possible. So we certainly want to move things in an efficient and productive manner, and we'll utilize any days and times to expedite and hopefully, you know, get done in such a manner that we can move out everybody's hair as quick as possible. But there will be what I would consider hopefully a slightly less but consistent usage of that area through the fall.
Okay, we have another Mary in the audience. I just want to give an opportunity for her to ask questions or comments as well. Mary Cradgick. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. Just a couple comments. On 232 High Street, toward the end of the project area. I walk High Street multiple times a week, and I realized today that the one crosswalk that's available goes right into the torn up sidewalk near Toppins Lane. I was coming back from Market Basket with a heavy cart full of shopping items and had to come down into that dirty area in order to get to the crosswalk. I think there should be some attempt to make temporary crosswalks when something like that happens, so you're not having to walk into, the torn up areas. Hopefully that won't be something that recurs all that often, but anyway, it's just something to be thinking about. The other comment really isn't about the project itself, but it's about the people that are working on the project, as well as the police who are coordinating some of the traffic control. I have seen multiple groups of people, both contractors and police, standing in groups not wearing masks. And as one of the people who's in a high-risk category, that disturbs me, particularly our police, who should be representing the policies of the city. So anyway, just an observation. I'd like to see people being a little more conscientious about it. I realize when you're doing heavy work, wearing a mask is difficult, but when you're standing around talking in a small group, I think you should be able to wear a mask. That's it. Thank you.
Glenn or Richard, I don't know if you want to speak to that. I guess I would say that I have been trying to pop in on the work site a couple of times a week, wearing my mask, and I have generally felt that the crews have been socially distancing, and you know, sometime I'm talking to the superintendent with his mask on when he's giving me an update on what's going on. So I think it's always a point well taken. But the mask wearing is generally recommended and required when one can't socially distance. And so it's up to the police and the contractor to try to follow those rules.
Concern noted. We as everybody is certainly understandable and cognizant of all that's going on, and trying to do our best to manage people's interactions, and as was recognized and appreciated that it's recognized. Sometimes on a 80 or 90 degree day and guys are doing physical labor, it can be difficult to manage through that all day long with a mask on. So we have generally try to keep the operation at a social distance versus requiring full-time masks. But certainly recognize if there are occasions where people are grouped together and aren't wearing them, it's something that we will look into and address. On the contractor side, we unfortunately have no bearing or control over the police, but I'm certain if it is an ongoing issue that they will address it as well.
Okay. Do we have anyone else in the public who has questions or comments or concerns regarding the project? Not seeing any at this time.
Got a few more, Andy, and we can wrap it up. So I would like to thank Mary for pointing out, the police should be wearing masks. So I think that's been noted on more than one occasion. So hopefully we can bring that up with the mayor and Marshall Murray on that. Thank you, Kitty. So the last meeting we had, the comment that was made by the folks was Cushing would be repaved after all the heavy equipment left. So I hope that is still going to be I don't expect to have it ground down and, pristinely repaved, but to at least have any damage done fixed. I thought that was part of the plan. And that's not even a question. Y'all can talk about that one later. The other one that I wanted to bring up, Jordy, we had talked about DPS and the helicopter pad down at Perry Way prior to the hospital, when they were going to be doing their upgrades and requiring a different location for the helipad. Is that location an option? Just curious. I know you've stated that you don't want to be that far away from the site, but was that ever considered? I didn't know if the hospital was still doing their work or not.
Talking about a helicopter pad down at the DPS on Perry Way?
Right. So the plan, when the hospital was going to be doing their expansion, they were going to have to move the helipad to another location temporarily. I didn't know if that was still going on due to all of the events that have happened in the last few months. We voted on that probably the beginning of March. So
Yeah, sorry. This is Andy, just to offer clarification there, and I'm not even sure if Jordy was on the wavelength about that because it may never come across his desk, but there was discussion when the hospital was getting permitting for their project to expand there they discussed with the city using the dead end cul-de-sac at the end of Perry Way, adjacent to Public Services DPW building, to put the helipad. So that's where this question is coming from. My understanding is they were still planning on using that, although I do not know right now the time frame.
All right.
That is also an area, my understanding, has been a turnaround spot for fire engines. So as Andy said, I'm not very. I had always been told that area was not available. The end of that cul-de-sac.
Okay. All right.
Oh, and Heather, so in terms of, you raised again the notion of the repaving.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it behooves us all to be clear. What I believe Pacella had offered and will offer is, if there's essentially potholes or something that needs to be filled, or a big gouge or something like that, that's what they've been anticipating a repair would be, as opposed to sort of a full skim coat or something like that of the entire area,
that's what I was assuming.
Figured.
If there's a monster pothole, that is going to have to be fixed before winter comes. That's for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And that is what our expectation was when we initially had requested and were granted permission to utilize the park.
Thank you, Mr. Pacella. Appreciate that.
Counselor, do you have any other questions?
I had a couple more questions, Andy. My hand was up, but maybe it's not showing.
It's not unfortunately, but go right ahead.
Yep, sure. Just a comment about the staging area, or lay down area, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, so I wasn't involved in these discussions at all. I mean, most of it is in Ward 3, and this was a while ago. But I think it might be helpful. I could work with Councilor Shand and maybe with the planning office, just so we can kind of figure out exactly what's going to be happening. Because I think people still might be a little confused in exactly what activity is happening, how long is it going to go, and I realize the school site might have been, ruled out, but it is a Safe Routes to School project. So I'm a little surprised that it was ruled out. So, we can maybe talk about this offline, but just getting some more specifics and looking at the routes, and especially if they have to come back next year, maybe there's something we can do so that the residents near the park right now get a bit of a break. But I do have a question from a resident who could not make it, and it's more on the design. So you may need to pull up the plans. But, we hear about the bump outs a lot, and I know these are new in Newburyport. So the question that he has is making sure, let me read this, is there's enough room for the bike lane so that they're at least 5 feet with the island bump outs. So first of all, I guess I want to confirm the width of the bike lanes, and then just confirm, which I assume it's designed correctly, but that there is going to be room. I do remember when the bump outs went in down by the parking garage, everybody thought it was too narrow, but it just looks that way, but it actually was to the correct scale.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, Christine. And I don't know if that's Ted Jones that you're.
It was, yes.
Yeah, because I've been speaking with Ted Jones about that.
Okay.
And I would also note that bump outs are actually not a new feature.
Oh,
We've
I know.
had them in
But yes.
downtown Newburyport ever since for many decades. It's essentially the same feature. So but the short answer is yes, there is room with the bump outs. Andy's showing this this rendering illustration. We can also go back to the plan that shows the pavement markings. But TEC, the engineer, laid the project out so that there's, I believe, 11-foot motor vehicle travel lanes, 5-foot bike lanes, and that's an expansion over the existing 4-foot travel lane, bicycle lanes. And then either a parking lane where there's room for parking, or the curb where the bump outs come out to. So there's ample room for all of those uses.
Sure. What's the typical distance from the edge of the bike lane to the bump out, like 1 or 2 feet?
I think that's approximately right.
Okay.
Portions of High Street, in the old striping plan, we unfortunately haven't seen those stripes for a while because of that project, that other project. But some of those bike lanes had the curb itself as one edge of the bike lane, and that was done because of High Street having a non-uniform width as it kind of goes in and out for its couple of miles length. But in this case, there should always, not only are the bike lanes wider than they were, but there should be a little bit of a buffer.
Excellent. Right there. Okay. Yeah, I know sometimes when you see it all built, it looks narrow, but it's doing what it's supposed to do with the kind of traffic calming. Just can you refresh my memory what the widths were on High Street? Again, because we haven't seen the lines in a while, and what they are in this project for this segment. And what's the Mass DOT standard nowadays?
Yeah, the Mass DOT standard is 5 feet now. When the bike lanes were done, maybe was that something like 15 years ago, the standard was 4 feet. And so, or whatever the meter equivalent was of that. And so that was what was installed back then.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And then just one other question I had from another resident with regards to the intersection at Toppins and High. And that's where one of the bump outs is going to be. Just the concerns with making left turns onto High Street, that's always fun. But there's going to be no restrictions on any turning movements at all.
Right.
I mean, you can still do a left.
Right.
Will this help, do you think, some of those turning movements? I did tell her that it is designed to slow traffic down and visibility should be better.
I'm sorry,
Just
so
wondering-
what is the question about whether there's any?
Is it going to be easier to make left turns on High Street once this project is done?
Will it be easier? Will it be easier?
Well, I think it will slow traffic, correct? I mean, that's the point of the traffic calming.
That is the point of the traffic calming, yeah. Oh, sorry, go
And
ahead.
the bump out should help with sight distance, I would think.
Yeah, this is Andy. I guess I would offer that I think it's going to improve visibility and safety. I don't know that the turning movements are necessarily improved or adjusted that much. We obviously made sure the designers or the engineers were making sure that there was enough room with the right radius of the islands and so forth to do that with the fire trucks and larger vehicles. But I don't think it's necessarily going to improve the ability to turn so much as just the safety of doing so.
Okay. Yes,
I
that
guess
makes sense.
I would note that that it's not going to be somehow significantly worse to turn, and that as Andy was noting, the point of the project was really not to improve, but was to maintain traffic flow, but not necessarily to somehow improve it. And the focus of the project was the safety and security of other users, other transportation modes in the corridor, pedestrians and bicycles.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. And one other question that I hear, and you've probably heard it, people always ask, why can't we put traffic lights on High Street? Just
Because
what's
most
your
people
answer to
don't
that? I
want
know
them.
there's certain volumes that are warranted for it, but
That has come up, I've been with the city for almost 2 decades now. That does periodically come up from some quarters. I would say that the significant majority of Newburyporters do not want more signals along High Street because of it slowing down traffic. And when, for instance, a somewhat analogous situation when Mass DOT and TEC were originally proposing this project a couple of years ago, they were including one of the new Hawk signals to go across High Street. Again, that's a pedestrian activated signal as opposed to a conventional traffic signal, but people did not want to see that aesthetically, much less have a light stopping them. So it's always the prerogative of the public and the city council and everybody else to consider whether we want additional signalized traffic controls along High Street. But in general, in the past, the answer has been in my experience, has been a pretty strong no to that, and to allow all these intersections to essentially sort themselves out. Oh, Andy's showing how the Hawk was eliminated from the original.
yes, I remember that.
Yeah, this was definitely a dialogue that Jordy and I were part of going back. We definitely received some negative feedback from folks about the idea of having something more involved like this. And so what happened was there was a shifting to the more pedestrian-oriented or designed crosswalk.
Gotcha.
I believe people think about Story Avenue, for instance, with its multiple lights, and how, depending on the timing, that can be difficult to get through. So, so again, I'm sure there are some people who would like to see some lights, some signals, or more signals along High Street than just at either end. But in general, does not seem to be supported by most.
Okay, that's what I suspected, but that is it for my questions. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? I see a few hands raised, but that may be just folks who just forgot to lower them. Not seeing any at this time. Councilors, did you want to address anything else?
No, thank you, Mr. Hartman and Mr. Bicella for joining us, and to Andy and to Jordy as well. Appreciate the taking your time to listen to us and answer questions. It is appreciated.
You're welcome.
You know, we appreciate the work you're doing out there. We look forward to you being done.
Yes. Oh, well, we all do, right?
Thank you very much. We appreciate your patience.
Okay, I guess then, Jordy, we'll probably wrap up the meeting then if
Yeah.
it looks like there's no further questions or comments.
We're all set. So thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Just a reminder, there is information on the city's website generically about the project, obviously. So, good evening, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Goodbye.